The long haul. I've been on the road for as long as I can remember, hauling cargo from one end of the country to the other. The rumble of my truck's engine is my constant companion, echoing through the desolate highways that stretch out before me like endless ribbons of asphalt. But on one fateful night, as I navigated a particularly remote stretch of road, I encountered something that would haunt me for the rest of my days. It was a moonless night, and the darkness seemed to swallow the road whole, leaving me with only the faint glow of my headlights to guide me. I'd been driving for hours, my eyelids heavy with fatigue, when I saw her. She appeared out of nowhere, standing in the middle of the road like a specter from the depths of my darkest nightmares. She was young, no more than a teenager, with long dark hair that hung in tangled strands around her pale face. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she seemed to be pleading for help. I slammed on the brakes, the screech of tires tearing through the silence of the night. But as my truck came to a stop, I realized that something was horribly wrong. There was no sound of impact, no jolt of the vehicle hitting flesh and bone. Instead, the girl simply vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness once more. Shaken but determined to put the encounter behind me, I continued on my journey. But as the miles stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat, every rustle of the wind a whisper of danger. It wasn't long before I began to see her again. At first, it was just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting figure standing on the side of the road. But as the night wore on, she became bolder, stepping out onto the asphalt in front of my truck, her eyes boring into mine with a look of silent desperation. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that the long hours on the road were playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. The girl was real, and she was leading me towards something unspeakable. I tried to resist her pull, to drive faster and put as much distance between us as possible. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling of dread that hung heavy in the air like a shroud. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I saw it. A dilapidated old house nestled in the heart of the forest, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in ivy. It was the kind of place that only existed in horror stories, a relic of a time long forgotten. But as I passed by, I saw her again, standing in the doorway with a look of silent longing, and in that moment I knew what I had to do. I pulled my truck to a stop and stepped out into the cold morning air, my heart pounding in my chest. The girl watched me with wary eyes, but she made no move to stop me as I approached. I reached out a hand to touch her shoulder, but before I could make contact, she vanished once more, leaving me standing alone in front of the abandoned house. For a moment I hesitated, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me like a leaden blanket. But then, with a deep breath, I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with the scent of decay. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but something compelled me forward. As I moved deeper into the house, I became aware of a faint sound echoing through the halls. It was a whisper, soft and barely audible, but filled with a sense of urgency that sent shivers down my spine. I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing on the ancient floorboards as I navigated the labyrinthine corridors. And then, at last, I found her. She was standing in the center of a dimly lit room, her eyes fixed on something unseen in the darkness. And as I approached, I saw it too. A figure stood before us, its features shrouded in shadow. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce straight through to my soul. And as it turned to face me, I saw the truth reflected in its gaze. The girl was not the victim here. She was the bait, luring unsuspecting travelers to their doom. And now, I was the next in line. I tried to run, to flee from the horror that awaited me in the darkness, but it was too late. The creature lunged forward, its claws tearing through the air like razors as it closed in for the kill. And as its cold embrace enveloped me, I knew that I would never escape the nightmare that had become my reality. As the darkness consumed me, I couldn't help but wonder, was I the only one to fall victim to the girl's trap? Or were there others out there, doomed to wander the endless highways for all eternity, haunted by the specter of a girl lost to the darkness? The midnight cargo. The road stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the darkness of the night. I gripped the steering wheel of my truck tightly, my knuckles turning white with the effort. It was just me and the open road, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the occasional howl of the wind. But as I navigated a particularly desolate stretch of highway, a chill ran down my spine. There was something off about this night, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. And then I saw it, a figure silhouetted against the darkness, standing at the side of the road. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination born from the long hours on the road. But as I drew closer, I realized that it was all too real. The figure was a man, tall and imposing, with a long coat that billowed in the wind. His face was hidden in the shadows, but I could feel his eyes boring into me as I passed by. I tried to shake off the encounter, to convince myself that it was nothing more than a hitchhiker stranded in the middle of nowhere. But the feeling of unease lingered, like a weight pressing down on my chest. And then just as suddenly as he had appeared, the man was gone, disappearing into the darkness without a trace. I pushed the encounter to the back of my mind and focused on the task at hand. I had a delivery to make, and nothing was going to stand in my way. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat, every rustle of the wind a whisper of danger. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, I saw him again. The man appeared in the middle of the road, his figure illuminated by the glow of my headlights. He stood there unmoving, his eyes locked on mine, with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest as I brought the truck to a screeching halt. But when I looked up, he was gone, vanished into thin air like a ghost in the night. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, when I heard it, a low, guttural growl emanating from the darkness beyond the edge of the road. Fear gripped me like a vice as I peered into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, emerging from the shadows, I saw them. Creatures, twisted and deformed, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce straight through to my soul. They moved with an unnatural grace, their movements fluid and predatory as they closed in on the truck. With a trembling hand, I reached for the gear shift, my mind racing as I tried to come up with a plan. But before I could even put the truck into gear, they were upon me. They swarmed over the vehicle like a pack of rabid wolves, tearing at the metal with claws that seemed sharper than knives. I fought back as best I could, but it was no use. They were everywhere, their numbers overwhelming as they dragged me from the safety of the cab. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, I saw him, the man from the road, standing at the edge of the darkness with a look of grim determination on his face. Without a word, he raised a hand, and a blinding light filled the night sky. And in that moment I knew. The man wasn't my enemy. He was my savior, a guardian sent to protect me from the horrors that lurked in the darkness. As the creatures recoiled from the light, I scrambled to my feet and ran, the sound of their enraged screams echoing in my ears. And as I drove away into the safety of the night, I knew that I owed my life to the mysterious stranger who had appeared when I needed him most. The haunting highway. The night was thick with fog as I navigated my truck along the winding mountain roads. Each curve seemed to lead deeper into the abyss, the dense mist swallowing the headlights and casting an eerie glow upon the surroundings. It was the kind of night that sent shivers down your spine, a night where anything could happen. As I rounded a particularly sharp bend, I caught sight of a figure standing by the side of the road. My heart skipped a beat as I slammed on the brakes, the screech of tires piercing the silence of the night. But when the truck came to a stop, there was nothing there. I shook my head, chalking it up to fatigue and the tricks of the mind. But as I continued on my journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The feeling grew stronger with each passing mile, until it was all I could think about. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something lurking in the darkness behind me. But the road stretched out empty and desolate, the fog swallowing up everything in its path. And then just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw her. a young girl no more than 10 years old standing in the middle of the road with tears streaming down her face. She was dressed in a tattered white dress, her hair matted and wild, as if she had been wandering the wilderness for days. My heart went out to her, and without thinking, I pulled over and stepped out of the truck. But as I approached, she let out a blood-curdling scream and vanished into thin air, leaving me standing alone in the darkness. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. But before I could gather my wits, I heard it. A whisper, soft and barely audible, coming from the depths of the forest that lined the road. It was a voice, cold and hollow, filled with a sense of longing that sent chills down my spine. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was just the wind playing tricks on my ears. But the whisper grew louder with each passing moment, until it was all I could hear. Driven by a sense of curiosity that bordered on madness, I followed the voice into the darkness of the forest. The trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels, their branches swaying in the breeze like skeletal fingers reaching out to me. And then, at last, I found it. A clearing, bathed in the pale light of the moon, with a dilapidated old house standing at its center. It was the kind of place that sent a shiver down your spine, a relic of a time long forgotten. But as I approached, I felt a strange sense of familiarity wash over me. It was as if I had been here before, as if the house held some dark secret that I was destined to uncover. With trembling hands, I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and decay, the silence broken only by the sound of my own ragged breath. And then, from the shadows, I saw her. The girl from the road, standing in the center of the room with a look of silent longing on her face. She reached out a hand to me, her fingers trembling with fear as she beckoned me closer. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me like a leaden blanket. But then, with a deep breath, I stepped forward into the darkness. And as I did, I realized that I was walking straight into the heart of a nightmare from which I might never awaken. But by then, it was too late.